that's okay. Just very quickly before we do start, he walked into the back room and he's just getting himself settled, but just wanted to welcome Mr. Steve for attending. Thank you for coming along. He sits on the improvement board. So jumping straight in, do we have any apologies for absence?
Eric's calling and Michael.
Lisa was on her way, just running a few minutes past. Do we have any declarations of interest or anything on the agenda? No. Chris?
Under class 5, there's minutes from their schemes, so
And I suspect it's funding through skills budget for local authorities. Is there interest in that?
No,
Previously we've always done that, haven't we? Okay, there we go, moving on. Minutes of the last meeting, any corrections, mistakes or errors? Anybody noticed? No, people happy to read the minutes? Yes? Yes, thank you. Nothing to add from me. If anybody has anything they want to ask. So moving straight on to item 5, the organisation improvement plan progress. So over to you. Do you want to get on, Judge? Over to you.
Thank you. Before we kick off into the main content of the agenda, I just wanted to explain an element in the papers, particularly for public understanding. So the Combined Authority has introduced a new cabinet cycle designed to strengthen engagement, partnership working and awareness in the preparation of our cabinet reports. This approach, previously endorsed by these cabinet members, ensures that decision making is informed by robust collaboration and clear accountability of our constituent authorities. The key engagement forum is the Tees Valley Management Group for constituent authorities. This group provides an opportunity for representatives to review and comment on combined authority reports at an early stage, ensuring that local perspectives and priorities are fully considered in their production. Alongside this, further engagement takes place with Section 151 officers within councils, their monitoring officers and chief executives, and of course through the informal meeting of the Cabinet, creating a comprehensive framework for comment and challenge. These steps are intended to drive partnership working, promote transparency and recognise the appropriate roles and responsibilities of all parties involved. By embedding these principles into the Cabinet cycle, the Combined Authority seeks to deliver decisions that are well-informed, collaborative and aligned with the shared objectives of this Cabinet. You will see on the front page of each agenda item a box entitled Report Considered By. In this box, where a report has been considered by this Cabinet cycle I've just referred to, you will see the wording pre-Cabinet process. This is what that is in reference to. Officers presenting reports may refer to this in their introductions. For members of the public, this means that constituent councils have been engaged on the agenda content, purpose and intent of agenda items, and they've had an opportunity to comment on draft reports and indicate if there are any areas of concern that may impact support for proposed recommendations. This has been the first cycle of this new approach, which will be continued to be reviewed and refined, and constituent officers are continuing to give us feedback on this approach and areas where we can improve it moving forward. Just wanted to explain that before we start on cabinet items.
Okay, just quickly come in on that. There has been some discussions, not with myself but around the leaders regarding chief executives and their ability to speak in this meeting. I just want to clarify that we're not going to stop that, because as a technical advisor to myself, that some of the questions and dynamic conversations we have are very much sometimes rely on my chief exec's technical advice, and I would hope that we might go down that route.
Happy to come in on that. So specifically on that point, the legislation is actually incredibly clear on this point. Only combined authority members are entitled to speak at this meeting, or officers of the authority. The authority in this case is of course the combined authority, so that would be officers of the combined authority. The chair of course has discretion to allow other individuals to speak during a meeting, and I believe that is the practice that has existed to date. Both the the order for the creation of this organisation clearly sets out the membership, and it is that membership that is legally entitled to take part in those meetings. That membership, of course, is the leaders or the appointees of the constituent councils to the board, to the cabinet, and of course the mayor of the combined authority. At this stage, I think it's a conversation for us to take out in those chief execs meetings in regards to how we move forward. But the expectation is that we need to represent the order as set out for how the combined authority operates. There would be obviously no question of asking leaders to not bring their chief execs along, to allow their chief execs to advise them during cabinet meetings. They've clearly got valuable input and insights they would want to advise their leaders with regard to content of items on the agenda.
Well, with all due respect, I will come back on that in this meeting. I hope Ben, as the mayor and the chair, does do his discretion. He's been involved in local politics for many years. And we all chair our own cabinets, and we all use that discretion to allow officers to speak on technical items within the frame of that meeting. And now that's been the practice of this particular authority for the last 2 years, and I hope it continues in that vein.
Yeah, I think it's important though that given the process we're going through, that just members are aware of the law and the orders and the situation. But yeah, as obviously I take that on board. Chris?
So I welcome the approach, but I think it then has to be really, really accurate. So for example, if we take the transport paper, that wasn't the paper that we presented at pre-cabinet. There was documents that came later, which were not included in the report as we saw it. If we take the Q2 report, since it was at pre-cabinet, there's 2 further agreements that have been added to the paper from the start of that process to now. So I think it needs to be really clear, because if it says that we've considered this at pre-cabinet, then it needs to be the paper that was at pre-cabinet, because otherwise it feels a bit misrepresented what the meeting was.
Take that on board. Thank you, Meg. We can take that on board. Obviously, like I said, it's the first attempt at the process. It's being refined. It will be improved. The intent is by the time we obviously get to AGM, we've got a really clear working process that all leaders and all constituent authorities are happy with. As I said, first attempt. Take that feedback. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I think just to come on that, I absolutely agree, because we need to be accurate in the representation, but I guess some of those amendments came in light of the conversation we had, so obviously we tried to reflect some of the discussion we had in the workshop after the meeting, so I guess it's just reflecting that so that the papers properly capture that when we circulate the final versions. Yes, so item 5, I'll probably say a few words and pass across to Sarah. So,
Sorry, Lisa.
I don't know if I'm on, am I? I'm on, yeah. Apologies for my lateness, and I do need to leave at 11:30, so apologies for that also. I just think, and I had a really good catch up with Jodie yesterday, but I'm really a little bit miffed about the lateness of papers sometimes, and so we might have cabinet pre-agenda, but it's always to go. And I know Jodie's taken this on board, and I do appreciate that, but we can make decisions as leaders when we're not getting papers. So I think the governance of TVCA needs to stand up to that, and Jodie's taken it on board, and I know I've spoken to you about it as well. We need to have the information at hand before we make decisions. So I'm not an expert, you know, I'm a lay member. I rely on my officers to give me the information I need and to give me advice on it. But if you're not getting the papers, then that's very, very difficult to get that information ahead so we can scrutinise and we can ask questions. And I know the public are here and we do get questions from the public, but if we don't have that information, we can't get the information, then that's very difficult. So apologies, but I just really need to say that. I know, Jodie, I raised it with you yesterday, and Tom, I've done it with you as well. So, and Ben, to be fair, who's really good with it. you're all good with it, but we need to get that process into place.
No, absolutely. So I'm not quite sure what papers you're referring to, because obviously we've had...
All of them, to be fair, Tom.
So we had...
Some of the cabinet papers were to follow. And
No, so in this round, so we obviously had I think it was informal cabinet 2 weeks ago, and you had the papers in advance of that, and then the papers for today were circulated last Thursday in accordance with all of our requirements. There's been no late papers.
I don't know if Jodie wants to come in on my conversation with her yesterday.
So this is in reference, we had a fantastic conversation yesterday about obviously the process of building up to cabinet meetings and the need to make sure that those who are obviously considering reports fully get those papers in advance as part of that development process. The reference I think is part of that development process, isn't it? In fact, that some of those papers were not part of that informal cabinet process and the build up to cabinet. Of course, all papers went out obviously within the deadline, and that's the piece we're working on now. So I take that on board, and the work we're doing, particularly around the forward planning, etc., should really put us in a much better position to address that moving forward.
Thanks, Jodie.
Tom, could we maybe look at a few days before the deadline? Because as leaders we get reports from all our directorates and the local authority, and there's 289 pages to read, digest and scrutinise ourselves before today's meeting, which is I'm not having a whinge, but if we had a little bit longer to digest that rather than go by the statutory deadline, I think that would help the situation.
Can I just ask, I'm slightly confused by this, because obviously the cabinet cycle is usually 8 weeks in advance. So we have, well it is, so it goes into management group, it goes into the FDs, it goes into the chief execs. We have a number of workshops. So the final paper, like the physical written form with the final words in black and white, might not have been started 8 weeks ago, but nothing of substance comes to cabinet that hasn't been discussed with the local authorities. Yeah, please.
Depends on your portfolio, Ben, to be fair. So I'm very well briefed, and I've had this back to Jodie yesterday, my officers, but I haven't got a clue what goes on in other portfolios. And you can say that's down to cabinet members to brief each other, and I can accept that. But I think sometimes we're asked to make decisions when we don't have all the information available. So myself and Steve spent probably 45 minutes last night speaking about something that Steve wasn't briefed on. I'm not briefed on transport, and Chris will represent me on transport today. So I think we just need to, and I had a really good meeting with Jodie yesterday, and he accepts that we've got some learning to do as a combined authority, and we need to get the scrutiny stuff, but also the governance sorted out a little bit. So as leaders, we have time to read stuff, and then for us to go to our officers, because as you know, I'm a lay member, I can say to my officers, can you brief me on this? Can you help me?
Yeah, please do.
If it's helpful, I think the specific element we're talking about here, so everyone's really clear, is we don't sort of have formal technical officer groups underneath each portfolio area at this moment in time, but it is something that's obviously being developed. They do exist in some areas. You've given the example in regard to your own portfolio, but that is something being developed as part of the work we're doing on the governance framework, and then that creates that pool of officers which has the lead officer from each constituent authority who can then go back in and give that briefing to all members of the cabinet, regardless of whether it's their portfolio lead position or not. That's the key thing I think we're currently talking about. So it's like a missing link in the governance framework to drive additional awareness, which we had a great conversation about yesterday, and we will definitely be implementing in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take away the feedback in the spirit it's intended. I think we have made a lot of improvements in terms of putting in informal cabinets, having the workshops, trying to give you early sight of everything where we can, but clearly we can still make further improvements, so we'll take that away. Yes, I think we're on to item 5, aren't we? So I'll just say a few words and then pass across to Sarah. So this is the report we bring to every cabinet in terms of progress against our organisation improvement plan. We're now nearly 9 months into the best value notice, and so obviously we're now moving towards the period the 12 months where government will review, which will be April next year. My view is we're continuing to make really good progress in terms of the improvement plan. We've made a lot of changes, and fundamentally at the heart of what we're doing is embedding those changes. So it's always this balance between moving at pace to make the required improvements but making sure we're putting the organisation on some really solid foundations going forward. So that's the work we're all doing as the top team. We're obviously working very closely with the Independent Advisory Board, and Rob's going to come in on the next item to give an update on that, and working very closely with the team at government in MHCLG, who are very close to what we're doing as well. I think in terms of giving Cabinet a sense of the roadmap going forward, so what we talked to MHCLG about is early in the new year pulling together what we believe as the Combined Authority is our position in terms of the progress we've made, the actions we've delivered against, and what we still need to keep working on. We also want to rerun the workshops that the LGA facilitated back when we got the first Best Value Notice back in April. We want to run those again to give Cabinet, our other committees and officer groups a chance to have their say, and we'll be structuring those and getting details of those out in the new year. So I'll pause there, so I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to pick up on the detail.
Yeah, there's just a few areas just to flag to Cabinet in this particular report. The report includes a progress update since we last met in September. So just a couple of things there, that under partnerships, we've now started development of a strategic external comms plan. So that work's commenced with support from Advisory Board member Dame Amanda Milling, and she's been supporting the team with that, and we're also using the Local Government Association as well. So they're facilitating a series of workshops with all key partners and stakeholders through to January to help inform the development of that plan. Also under governance, there are a couple of separate items on the Cabinet agenda today, picking up progress with the Single Assurance Framework design principles, and there's also various constitutional matters as well. In terms of other meetings that we've had since September Cabinet, we had an informal Independent Advisory Board in October, which focused on progress update with the governance deep dive that we'd had in September, and it also looked ahead to the use of resources deep dive. That was undertaken by the formal Independent Advisory Board meeting on Monday this week. We had a quarterly visit from the MHCLG Best Value Notice team in October. They held a number of one-to-ones with statutory officers, and they also focused the meeting around a progress update with governance and use of resources. And that visit was joined in part by Adele Britton, who, on behalf of Rob, is the chair. So, as Tom's already said, during January and early February we're holding a further round of engagement workshops which will be facilitated by the Local Government Association. We've got another formal Independent Advisory Board meeting on the 9th of January, and the deep dive topic for that one will be partnerships and continuous improvement. And we also have another quarterly visit from the MHCLG Best Value Notice team on the 16th of January, which again will focus on progress to date. They'll be holding further one-to-ones with officers, and it'll also include attendance again from the chair of the advisory board. So just asking Cabinet to note the progress update.
Thank you. Can I just firstly apologise for my croaky voice, and this is my first meeting, so nice to be here. I just wanted to pick up on the strategic priority number 5 around delivering long-term planning and performance, and just to say that there's a lot of really good stuff in the whole report in terms of progress and the direction travel, but I just wanted to highlight that one of the things that I think would be really beneficial is that sort of next tier down of engagement. I know that we had a really good session with Tom and the directors, with my policy chairs in Hartlepool and our directors, and in terms of developing that shared understanding of the priorities and the challenges that both sides have. It was a really positive session, and I think it just highlights the benefit of engagement being beyond just the leader of the authority, and actually it's about all the people who either have portfolios or, in our case, policy chairs, and just that whilst it's not in here, that I would encourage that as a way forward in terms of fostering that better working relationship, because it's about all of us pulling together and pushing for the whole of the Tees Valley region, and a shared understanding and involvement in decision making is the best way for us to do that.
Chris?
So I was sort of hoping that this would come from the improvement board at some point, and it maybe has. But just a sort of question on the Appendix 1 and the sort of the way that it's formatted. So each of the items, in my opinion, should probably have a sort of an identifying number or a phrase, so that we're able to sort of separate them out, because a lot of them come across the same themes. Where there are ones that are clearly not hitting the deadlines, there should be some sort of formal change request that comes to Cabinet to say this isn't hitting the deadline, this is the new deadline, do you accept this? And then we're able to keep better track on them, because otherwise, at the minute, there's stuff in there that's Q2, which clearly hasn't been done, or has been done, we're not aware of the progress being made, but because there's no new deadline, it just continues to slip. There's also no summary of the sort of the actions on track, so that would be quite useful to have a almost like summary table, just to say of the actions, these are really on track, and these are really not on track. But I'm a bit worried how many, because I think it's over 50% now are not on track, and there's probably a good reason for that. They're probably very close to being done, but it does feel like that number continues to grow, and if we're not having a better grip on it, I'm struggling to see how we can sort of bring that back.
Do you want me to come back on that?
You go first, Sarah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Mayor Cook. I take the point that I think a number of those dates haven't been revisited or updated. We are working on a dashboard to give a summary of the position. I'm sure you'd appreciate that there's 47 actions in the action plan, and they're not linear. Some rely on other activities to take place before others can. So as an example, a full constitutional review probably includes, Georgie, I think, quite a number of those actions in the governance section as well. So they'll probably all be wrapped up in that same train for that timeline. But yes, happy to keep tweaking it and provide a more detailed summary report as well in terms of what's progressed, and also make it clearer which ones haven't progressed to deadline. But I think it's just a function of the number of actions, Chris, in terms of where we are in progress, and that we've had to prioritise some of those over others in the action plan.
But equally, it sort of helps to show the scope of work, doesn't it? It helps to show that actually, if something is reliant on another action being completed, then it's more about setting realistic timelines, whereas it currently looks like we're just not achieving those targets.
Yes,
and if it comes back with a reason why it's being extended, it helps to tell that story a bit better than it currently does.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll take that feedback, and I'll have a reworked version, and I'll send it round to Cabinet for comment.
Yeah, just to come in on that, Chris, I think Sarah's right. I think when we developed the action plan, they were set out as discrete actions, when in reality they're not discrete actions, and a lot of them have overlap and they're joined up. And I think, but your point is absolutely fair. And I think what we're going to be doing, as I said earlier, in January, is pulling together that full narrative of everything that we've done over the last 9 months. And I think that will give you exactly what you described in terms of that narrative around each of the actions, and actually how they all come together as a sort of package of work. And just on Pam's point, the offer exists. I'm happy to come out and talk to any of your committees. I went to full council at Hartlepool last night. So I work very closely with all of you around this table, and we work closely with our statutory committees, but we've had feedback in the past around how some of your wider councils don't always know what's going on in the combined authority. So again, myself and the team are happy to work with you, because I think that will be beneficial in terms of anything else you've got going on within the council.
And it was brilliant, wasn't it? Brilliant.
Not the best.
Well, he survived, didn't he? So. Okay, can we note that report, please? Yeah. Okay. And then moving on to item 6, which hopefully we've solved some of the problems. Rob, can you hear us, Rob?
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Good morning, Ben, and good morning, everyone. We had an improvement board on Monday. I'll give you a quick update on that. The bottom line message is that we think good progress is being made, and that we see sufficient progress that we would recommend to the department that in May you look normal enough not to have a best value notice. I know the aspiration of looking normal might not seem the most exciting thing in the world, but looking that combined authorities have difficult issues to deal with. There will always be issues that have to be worked on, but that you have sufficiently sound and robust and established governance, and that you have a sound and robust financial plan. If you deliver what's in the improvement plan, and at the moment you're on target to do so, then we would be supportive of the best value notice being lifted. But it's not our decision; it is a decision for the department, and they will take our advice into account as well as your thoughts on that, and they will doubtless take some other stakeholders on board. If they're going to make that decision in May, realistically, they would probably put a submission to ministers around about April. So obviously we want to be in the position, as Tom said at the January meeting, that we understand the narrative of everything that's happened. I've got two things that came out of the meeting. Obviously, in the past, there has been some misalignment on the understanding of terms and conditions when grants or loans or other transactions have been agreed with the development corporations. And so you're in the position now where Joe Moore has done a very thorough piece of work, and we were really impressed with Joe's bringing out all the dirty washing and understanding your potential liabilities. But clearly there is some work to be done around, have you given a loan, have you given a grant, are you being repaid, what's the period for that? And we appreciate that that's all in the past and you're trying to tidy it up now, but of course we'll be interested on how robust your decisions are now. If between now and May you give any more grants, or you give any more undertakings, or you give any guarantees, we would want to see that you're having robust discussion to understand the full implications and the liabilities for that, and that your books align with everybody else's books. And how does that work through your scheme of delegation, and how does that work with Cabinet? Because in the past there has been some opaque or obtuse or less than thorough work, which now causes you some problems that in putting together your medium-term financial strategy, you've got to bottom these things out because you've got potential gaps. So, I don't want to overplay it. This is not uncommon territory for many bodies, that they have to make sure that the commercials that have been agreed in the past are understood now between all parties. But you've got some work to do with South East Development Corporation of bottoming out the financial implications of what's been agreed in the past, and we would want to know that we have confidence that wouldn't happen again, and that you've got sufficient finance capabilities, commercial skills and governance to bottom out those things thoroughly before they're agreed, rather than a couple of years down the line realise that there's a problem. I hope that's helpful feedback, but we were very impressed with Joe's presentation on Monday. You are getting on top of the accounting issues, and you're getting on top of the financial management and medium-term issues. Clearly you want to make sure that you've got the good governance to be able to stop things like that happening again, together with good financial capabilities. And the second point I'd make is the journey towards cabinet members really being able to digest all of this stuff. We see Jodie improving the role of monitoring officer, we see Joe improving the role of CFO. You get huge packs of information, and you need finance and legal implications that help see the wood for the trees and explain what's going on, in order that, are you getting supported back in your own council in order to understand these issues? Do you need some support from TVCA? Again, by the time we get to May, I'll come around and meet everybody again, if that's all right. And hopefully we can triangulate that as cabinet members you feel better briefed between your own councils and PVCA staff on the pack of information that you're getting. So they were the two, rather than re-rehearse everything, they were the two issues that came out of Monday's meeting. As ever, I'll do a letter setting out what we thought, but remember, I'm highlighting the issues that we think are worth highlighting. Overall, we see good progress being made by Tom and Jodie and Joe and everybody else, and you are on track, I think, to give NHCLG a view that you're normal and you will do it, and you know, normal organisations can deal with the issues that arise because they've got governance and capabilities in place to deal with them. And that, you do look on that journey and you're making progress. Sorry, that's a bit of a whistle stop. Ben, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And from here, I take from that there's lots of if, buts and maybes within that, so there's still lots of progress to make over the coming months for us to put ourselves in that best position. But I appreciate the feedback. Lisa?
Gung-ho Lisa at the minute, apparently I'm called. Thanks for that really comprehensive report, Rob. I don't know if you can hear me, you're looking a little bit.
I can now,
yeah.
thanks.
So what I would say is, as a relatively new leader since April, I listen to other leaders and I do think TBC has come a long way, and I met with Jodie yesterday, I meet regularly with Tom and Ben too, and it's really, sorry.
Is the top switch on?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I've got it on, yeah. It is really good. You mentioned May to meet with leaders, but I would appreciate if you could do something very early in the, I haven't spoken to
no, before May, but I'd like to meet you in the new year, if that's all right, please, in order that come March or April, we've got your feedback to play into the decision that the department will make in May. So I think TBCA staff are trying to get in your diaries for January, hopefully, to have some meetings.
That would be really good, thank you. And I haven't spoke to other leaders on this, but I would appreciate a meeting with the Best Value Board before May to give that feedback, if you like. So sorry if I misunderstood, but I think early in the new year would be really good for us. And a lot of it is positive, but there is still some works, and I know officers will accept that.
Yeah.
Alec?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Rob. You used the word normal at the beginning, and you talked about sort of other areas. I'm assuming then you've looked at sort of these mayoral corporations in other areas or combined authorities. And I'm just wondering, when then you went on about the data washing and the fact that we've got over £500 million worth of liabilities, were you referring to we're normal now as we are moving forward? Or could you just explain a little bit when you said normal and how we compare to them other mayoral corporations that you've done this piece of work on?
So a good authority would already have in place a complete understanding of how these liabilities will be dealt with in the medium term, because the terms of repayment, that extra business rates will lead to the ability to generate income. The timelines for that were agreed and deliverable at inception, and clearly what you've got is some misalignment where things are in your budget but not in other people's budget, or it will take longer for that business rate income to be built up than the model that was made at inception. So you're now trying to sort that out and identify it all, which you need to do, and a normal authority would have those things clear at inception of a transaction. It's all part of the transaction being agreed in order that you don't have to sort it out later on, as you are presently having to sort it out now. So I think Joe's exercise of trying to understand the misalignment between organisations is a good exercise to do. But what we hope for you is that it wouldn't happen again, because clearly you've got the capabilities in place, that things are agreed and they're crystal clear in delivery when they occur. And that's what a good organisation looks like. And you're on the journey there, but not there until you've sorted out these issues and it's absolutely clear that in agreeing things in the future, there would be a rounded, robust and accepted terms between all parties.
If I may, yeah, thank you very much for that. I echo the work Jodie and Joe are doing has been fabulous and moving forward. So in reality, we're not normal yet, is what I'm taking from that. But we want to be normal. We are working to be normal. Just from your experience and when we talk about repayment terms that need sorting and this drive to be on top of that, and we all want them to come out with the best value. In your experience, how long do you think that might take for us to get to that stage where we can say we're normal?
Well, I hope you're in that position for May, and I hope that as we review progress in January, February and March, and you start to talk to MHCLG in March and April, in order that ministers are briefed when the May deadline comes, we hope you're in a position to appear normal. And that's not to say that everything is dealt with. It's that you look like an organisation that has a way of dealing with the issues from the past and making sure that they don't happen again. And you know, in coming round to meet you in the new year, in working with Tom and the team, we will triangulate between you all what you all think about that journey to being robust. And I hope you can do that for me, is my answer.
Thank you very much for that fair analysis, Rob.
Thanks, Alex. Stephen?
Thanks, Rob, for that.
I can't hear any answer.
Yeah,
Is that on there?
Yep.
Thanks for that introduction, Rob. And much of what you were saying was favour to hear. In that particular board meeting, of all the things that are still in progress, are there any particular areas where you feel we are, not because there's no effort being put into it, that present us particularly at risk in terms of not reaching that normality that the Combined Authority does need to have a particular focus on going forward?
It's a really good question. I think we're interested to know how.
He's frozen. No. Sorry, Rob. Sorry, Rob. Just start again. You just froze just at the most important moment there.
Oh, sorry. We're interested to see progress on how engagement works and how engagement is fed into decision making, and what's your approach to that. There's an awful lot of external noise, isn't there? And there's a lot of noise about things that have happened in the past. And I think the bit that we know that Tom and the team want to deal with, but the bit that we're interested to see developed now, is the way that you work with stakeholders. And I think there is good progress being made on this. I know that, you know, there are meetings with MPs, there are meetings with stakeholders, but I think we're interested to see what will your approach be to engagement and building that into decision making, so that there's no sense whatsoever with you that sometimes things get a bit rushed, or they're not fully dealt with, or people are not fully engaged with in order to make a quick decision. We want to see that we understand that engagement is routine for you, and that's built into feedback and the way that decisions are made. And I'd say that's the area where it's in your plan to do that, but we'd actually like to see some delivery of engagement being done in a different way.
If I can just come back on that, so stakeholders is a very wide group of people. In terms of what evidence you're looking for, some of that will be much easier to do. So internal stuff with the local authorities, perhaps easy to evidence. But
yeah, I agree. And what we're looking Oh, sorry.
And so the examples there you gave was MPs. It's just, one many groups of people that we will need to engage with that aren't part of TVCA or local authorities. In terms of the evidence for that, what is it that we need to provide?
Well, what's the strategy? What's the engagement strategy? What are you planning to do in the next year? How are you planning that fits with understanding your priorities in order that you're looking proactively to get information and engagement that will help you in the decisions that you know are coming up in next year? So an approach to strategic communications rather than reactive communications. Rather than having to answer questions about the past, you can tell us what your plans are for the next year. Who are you going to engage with and when, around which decisions, in order that the relevant stakeholders feel involved and consulted on the decisions that you're making. Not to say that they'll agree with you, but you're forward looking to who you plan to talk to rather than reacting, and you have been in a position of a lot of reactive comms, a lot of press office stuff. What we're interested to see is how do you intend to use communications and engagement in the next year to help you make good decisions.
Thanks, Stephen. Chris?
So just two really. So you say about progress. There's only really been, 3 actions completed in total? There's at least 3 items which are at the deadline of Q1 of 2025. I'm just wondering, what are you using to base that analysis on? Is it, I wouldn't know where that comes from, because I'm slightly concerned that we're not. This seems a bit different to the process we went through, and it felt like there was a lot more rigour coming from the board. So that the stuff that I've raised earlier, our board proactively would have suggested that the fact that the timelines have slipped, what you're doing is suggesting new timelines. How are you helping to keep a grip of that?
Well, I hope I've given a balanced language that we see progress, but there are things left to do, and I don't think it's the job of the improvement board to keep a grip. Our job is to advise you whether we see you keeping a grip, because our job is to say when there's not an improvement board here anymore, will the issues around improving governance, will the issues around improving finance, will progress on all of the improvement plan actions, does that look like it will get dealt with through normal governance? And it isn't the job of the improvement board to manage the organisation or to have grip. Your job is grip, and our job is to say whether or not we think there'll be sufficient grip in the way that you operate as a combined authority, including the work of the cabinet, that the government can feel that it can lift the best value notice because you will deal with things in a usual way. I think it's good that I've heard a conversation this morning where you're questioning whether or not there's enough progress being made against the action plan, and that a number of items aren't delivered yet, and that there's slippage on that, and that's being questioned. I think that's good, and I'm glad to hear that in your meeting, because that does mean that you're questioning in this forum whether or not progress is being made. So I'm not trying to be clever and turn the argument around, but my view is, do you have grip on these issues, and where you have concerns that there's slippage, what are you as a collective group going to do about it, and do you feel that you're able to make progress on those things? And our job is just to be the honest ear that tells you what we see and what we hear on that. I think you are getting more grip, but there is progress to be made.
And just the second point about are we being briefed correctly by officers? I take some level of hindrance with that. So if I was to take the last round that we just went through, there was the pre-cabinet papers that came out, there was 3 items to follow, we then received about 2 or 3 days later some of the items then, and then after the meeting we then received one of the appendixes that we then needed. It is not a case that I'm not being briefed correctly or that officers are not briefing correctly. It's a question of timing and availability of information. I cannot expect my officers to, at a moment's notice, prep to just have random slots of their day available for whenever the papers may land. I think what needs to happen is a much more robust process, is to ensure that all the papers are correct at time of release, or as close to as they can be, and then briefings can happen accordingly. I think it feels a bit unfair to sort of, that challenge felt a bit unfair to suggest that are we being briefed correctly rather than do we possess the information at a timely fashion in order to be briefed, I think is my counter.
Yeah, I take that on board. That's very interesting feedback. Thank you. And I don't think I'm trying to apportion any blame as to who's responsible. You need papers in advance in order to have a system where decision makers feel they've got the information that's needed in advance and can be briefed on it between your own staff and between TVCA staff. So, yeah, you know, I don't think you need to counter me because I'm not giving any blame or opinion on where that rests. Your feedback is really interesting. Thank you.
I think it also goes back to the point that was made earlier that I think there's an education process that leads us to understand the full process. To focus just on the pre-cabinet papers is basically only a quarter of the process, because actually the process starts with local authority officers 4 to 6 weeks in advance of that. And okay, the papers aren't produced, but the substance of the papers are shared and then moulded by officers within local authorities that should be regularly updating senior officers and leaders within the councils. But I think there's an education process, and to be fair, Jodie, as part of this, is undertaking a review of what that process should look like, so that it's not just about having papers, say, 7 or 14 days in advance. Actually, it's about understanding what's coming to cabinet in December back in September. Because our processes, like I say, start 12 weeks in advance of the cabinet process. And I think, as Tom said earlier, even post pre-cabinet, it's taking into account feedback from all of us around the table, so that the final cabinet papers can reflect even the feedback that's given in the pre-cabinet, which is there to be able to manage any of those changes or sequences that we want to capture in final papers. So it's an 8-12 week process. It's not a 2 or 3 week process. This also goes back to one of the things that we collectively as leaders said back when we met with the LGA, that and I think, to be fair, it's still something that Jodie's working on, because it's not happening as overtly and concretely as I would like, and I think I'm hearing this strongly from leaders, that the leaders should be put at the front of the process. And at the moment, it's still partly the old process, which is it's officers dealing with that in the first part of the process, and we then get introduced partway through. And I think if we're able to do that, it would help alleviate a lot of the concerns and problems around that. Lisa?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some challenge back here, Ben, that I'm not sure, so I do ask my officers, have you had that briefing? And I don't think they get it in the time scale you're saying. Great meeting. I do think, and from officers they say, we've come a long way, and I'll accept that, Rob, that I think TVC has come a long way and we're on a journey. And my meeting was great with Jodie yesterday, but there's still a long way to go, so I would challenge you back and say, I will go to my officers and say, give me the briefing, you've had this, and I get sometimes told by my officers, no, we haven't had it. So to follow and to follow and to follow is not good enough, because we can't challenge as leaders, and that's our that's our role, to challenge. But I need my officers to be able to give me that briefing, or officers of TVC, who, to be fair, I think have been really, really good lately. And I know in my portfolio I'm more than happy with that. However, what I would say is other items, so I'm not going to call Steve out here, but transport, for example, I don't have a clue because I'm not the transport cabinet member. So what I would like is my officers to then brief me and say, these are the things you need to be asking, and I'm not sure we're getting that still, and Geordie knows and Tom knows, I've had this conversation, I'm very open and honest. And I accept that I think we're on an improvement journey and we have come a long way. I've only been a leader since April, so I can only speak from April, but I can see a massive difference. And but I would like my officers, I am not sure, Ben, sorry, that the timelines you're given are actually accurate. So maybe you need to give that challenge to your officers.
Well, I think what we need to do is share the actual pre-cabinet process with leaders in black and white on a timeline, because it does start 12 weeks in advance. And just to pick up the transport.
Me and Geordie had that yesterday.
Yeah, and to pick up the transport point as well, absolutely it could be done in a much better fashion, but again, it's about formalising the process with its transport officers in each local authority are engaged. I know Alan does engage them on a regular basis, so they do get briefings on a continuous basis, as do the skills teams in the local authorities, as do the culture teams in the local authorities. So that is happening. I suppose it's helping leaders understand what is that current process and what do we want it to look like, and how do we formalise that engagement. Because at the moment, the way that it seems to be structured to me is it allows for a lack of accountability both at TVCA and local authority end. You know, it creates actually a dynamic where it's easy for people in local authorities to blame TVCA and people in TVCA to blame local authorities. And I think that governance process needs to be cleared up, because to be honest, it happens on both sides, and that's why it's really important that we get this work done with Geordie over the coming weeks, because that should just make it completely transparent, completely objective, so that if you're getting a briefing and they're saying, well, I haven't had a briefing, it's like, well, you should have done because our processes are this, so what's going wrong? And vice versa, if we're not doing what we should be doing, well, hang on, why aren't you as portfolio getting the briefing that you should be having in, because that's part of our process. So.
Can I just come back?
Yeah,
and I had this conversation with Geordie yesterday, and he knows, and I think there's some accountability, and I'm not going to blow smoke up your Ben, but there's an accountability on cabinet members as well to brief each other. And so, you know, I would expect it as a local authority level, my cabinet members to brief me about what's going on in their portfolio. So I do think we should take it on the chin, as well as TVCA as well. And it's about us having accountability for our portfolios, briefing other cabinet members about that. And I think there's learning all around. I'm not being critical, I'm just being very, very honest about it.
No, and I think we're agreeing with each other in that that's where we want to get to. Because, you know, you to be fair, Lisa, you definitely know as much as I do, if not, I would be more around the skills portfolio at the minute, because there's nothing that you don't get that I don't get. And I could probably say, I can say that probably about Stephen. Stephen knows as much as I do on transport.
I'm over-briefed at some point.
No, so you get to a point of what's the appropriate process, and the appropriate process has to be, and we've still not got there yet, but we talked about this 6 months ago as leaders. We want to get to a place where it's not me and it's not officers presenting papers, it's cabinet members presenting their portfolio. And to do that process is going to be...
And we've had this discussion, and you know, I will give a little bit of credit here, that I say I will not put, in my local authority, when I was a cabinet member, I would not put a paper through that I wasn't 100% certain on. And I give that challenge to officers in TVCA and said, I'm not going to put something, so we've got a paper today. I would not put that through if I hadn't been totally part of that process. So what I will say, and credit where it's due, I have got that assurance.
Yeah, good. I think Joe wanted to come in first, and then...
Yeah, so it was just, to be honest, you sort of cut part of it off, but I think we also need to differentiate between the types of papers as well. I know Jodie and I had lengthy discussions about this. So some of the papers are quite strategic in nature, and you need that really early engagement, informing the paper, etc. And that's what Jodie's done in terms of making that much further on the 8 sort of week process. Some of the papers, like the routine monitoring, like a finance report, our aim will be to always get that out in time for informal cabinet, head of informal cabinet, but sometimes because of the reporting cycles that might be quite tight. So then the idea will be to make sure that I meet with Chris, being a finance portfolio holder, which we now do, we meet regularly, so that at least Chris is properly briefed, on the detail of it, even if cabinet, the wider cabinet, only get it just about in time for informal cabinet, but it will always be for informal cabinet going forward. It won't be just in time for publication, it will always be. That's the aim. But just there is a slight differentiation between the contents of the report and what we're asking cabinet for.
Jodie, did you want to just quickly add something?
I'm just going to support what Joe just said. I think that's a really, really important point. But I think just coming back to the journey point that we're on, so we know we have two missing components which are going to make a massive difference in this regard moving forward. That's technical officer groups that sit underneath portfolios, having those fully established. That is the standard practice of that interaction and partnership in a combined authority setting. We have a great example of where we have it in place, where it's working. We know we've got to do that now across the piece, but part of that journey is to take into account the future governance framework of this organisation, those core areas of competency coming out of the bill and the governance review that we're doing as part of the organisation improvement plan. So there was never an intent in that plan to bring forward that TOG development, technical officer group development, until we get into sort of the January, February time zone, which we're now approaching. The other key component where we really need to do some work is on forward planning. So having a much more detailed forward plan. So it's standard within the combined authority setting, you aim for a 6-month forward plan. And we're obviously doing lots of work internally to get to that point where we can set that out and make sure that that forward plan is owned by the cabinet. So the cabinet knows 6 months in advance the key decisions that it's got coming before it and it will have to make. So progress is being made, but I think once those two key elements are in place, I would hope that you see some significant improvements, in particular in these areas you're currently discussing.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it builds on the point that I made earlier. I think that if we get to the point, if we're in an organisation where the cabinet meeting is the first time that we've seen papers and stuff, we're not functioning properly at all. And I think the point that I made earlier, it's about involvement in the decision-making process all the way through. And I would like to think that in 12 months' time, we're not sitting here having the same conversations because of the things that we put in place through this process, that actually what we end up with is engagement throughout the development of a paper or a policy before it becomes a paper that comes to cabinet. And I just wonder whether some of the frustrations now are the result of the reason that we're in the situation to start with, and actually, as Lee said, we're on that journey. But to stress, and it's a point I'm going to make in terms of some of the other items later on, that it is about just involvement in coming to the conclusions and the recommendations, rather than sitting here waiting until it's presented to us as a report.
I think maybe a suggestion on the way forward, because I don't think it's just about the process of the cabinet reports. There's an awful lot of officer groups that meet and spend a lot of time debating and discussing and shaping pretty much everything on this agenda. But what I'm hearing is there's a disconnect between that and what cabinet. So I think we've got to make sure that whatever officer group exists, cabinet understand it and own it, because ultimately all those groups are about giving you exactly what you've asked for, the intelligence, the information, the opportunity to shape stuff early on in the process. And I just feel there's a real disconnect, because it feels to me like you don't probably see or probably fully reflect all of these discussions that are happening at an officer level. So I think we need to bring something back, because cabinet needs to own that. And if there's officer groups meeting, you need to understand how that in effect is helping you to do your job. So I don't think that's the case. So we can take that as an action away to bring something back, because ultimately all that officer group and all the time that's spent, cabinet needs to understand that and say that that's the right structure that they want to see to empower you to do your jobs.
And I think there's probably a bit of further nuance to that as well. So I think as leaders, we probably all operate differently across the spread. I think there's 3 different council systems, isn't there? There's a cabinet model, there's a mayor model, there's a traditional local authority model. And actually we all probably operate differently and have different expectations. So for me to walk in with a PowerPoint I've written myself and deliver a presentation to staff is actually not unnormal. I mean, it's not wanted most of the time, but it's the way that we sort of operate. And actually, it's probably a bit different for each of us. It's probably not saying that we mould every process to fit everyone, but I think if you understand the nuance of where we're all coming from, then it makes it a bit easier to sort of understand the style that we then prefer or accept information in better.
That's a good fine. I think officers will take that on board and reflect that back, and that's an action you're taking with us.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for Rob? No. Well, thank you, Rob. Appreciate your time.
Nice to see. Very interesting conversation. I mean, I enjoyed the points that were made, and it gives us a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. Ben, and have a good day, everybody.
You too, Rob. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, so thank you for that. We'll note that and we'll move on to Joe's report, the quarterly budget monitoring report.
Yeah, thank you all. So, I'll take it as read. As we talked about this morning, finances are on an improvement journey. We are well on the way on that journey now. I think we've probably got to the point in Q2 where we've turned over some of the stones. We know some of the issues that need to be resolved, and some extra work that needs to be done, and you'll see reference in the report that there's still some things that need to be resolved for Q3. For instance, the capital monitoring, which I know was a big discussion at the budget workshop. So Alan, we now have our dedicated somebody to help Alan now, because our capital programme is mainly transport. So I've got a person that started now to help Alan with monitoring. So there's definitely work still being done, so we're not quite there yet, but we're certainly on a journey. In terms of the Q2 position, the report, as you've read, is currently indicating an overspend just under £1 million, and is asking, should that not be able to be mitigated, that would be met from a use of the devolution fund, and there is sufficient funds in there to do that. That is an earmarked reserve, and that's separate to your general fund balance of just over £1 million, which is your general contingency. What I would say is, in terms of revenue, some further work needs to be done, is making sure that our overhead costs and our support and enabling services are appropriately charged to the grants that they serve. So for instance, if we've got finance people working on the transport grant, with the transport grant there is eligibility within the grant T's and C's for those costs to be met from that transport grant. It's like an administration cost. So there's a piece of work to make sure that we've got the right mechanism in place to recharge those properly. Not all of the grants will have the same T's and C's, so some of them you're able to do a top slice, or 10% top slice, others it would have to be a specific calculation, but that piece of work is underway. So we're hoping we'll be able to balance the budget without the need to draw down on that reserve. However, you'll also note from the Q2 report now that there is a specific section out on risks, financial risks, which is now going to be a standard part of the report. There are some inherent risks in that section, and there are some risks that actually may come to fruition. So again, coming back to Rob's point about getting the accounting right, both sides of the fence in terms of the on-lending to SDDC, there is something that we're looking at the moment, and that may put an additional pressure on for Q3. But as I said, that work will be concluded in time. I'm hoping for Q3, everything that's been uncovered and working through will be resolved by then. So Q3 should be our absolute solid forecast outturn for the year. There's a couple of things we're asking Cabinet to do. One is a proposed change to the revenue budget. This is merely, there's just over 2 million for Business Growth Fund. This was to be spent on revenue schemes. I believe you will come in, Sarah, at any point, but this was to be spent on revenue schemes. And we're now, with agreement from central government, we're now using that 2.3 million to fund an enhanced capital programme as opposed to a revenue delivered programme. So the report asks for both approval to change both the revenue and capital budget purely for that impact.
Would you like me to provide a little bit more detail? Yeah. So I have had discussions with each of the Cabinet members about the position we were in with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and that actually there was some funding that had been allocated in the investment plan but not yet committed to a project. So that was allocated to deliver business support, and we've talked about us co-developing a potential programme to support SMEs next year. This allows us to use the UK SPF within the required time frame, which releases some more flexible funding for us to deliver that next year. So that is the financial requirement based on the conversations that we've had.
Alec?
Just go back to the briefings and portfolios I am the leader and being fully briefed by Sarah on this, and I support that. Just on the legal terms, the variance, I know we agreed, didn't we, back in the summer, the extra expenditure. I'm just wondering to dissect that a little bit more. How long is that going to be shown as a variance or as a pressure?
So could you reference which part?
The external legal fees. I know there's a paragraph, the 900k on 3.7, is it? Sorry, my eyes. I do have 20/20 vision.
Joe, I think, Alan, this is about, we've been spending a lot of money on external legal advice.
No, we had. I remember going back to the summer, we had this conversation.
So Jody is...
I'm just wondering why it's classed as a pressure that we hadn't.
I think it's because obviously Jody only joined us in August, and obviously we'd incurred a lot of spend up until August, but Jody's been taking steps to basically bring more in-house resource in place, so we're now spending less on external legal advice. Do you want to just...
Yeah, so one of the key drives I've been tasked with doing is reducing that external legal spend. We found to date by bringing in actually the right type of resource within the team that we're not having to go out for that planned external legal costs. I don't have the figures today. I'll happily send them around following this meeting, but my understanding is we have significantly reduced the expenditure on external legal resources as a result of bringing in that lower cost resource within the actual legal team.
Okay, which is a good news story.
And I'll get the actual figures so I can share them.
So the 900,000 pressure, that's previous spend on the external then, up to you guys being appointed, yes? Yeah, okay.
That's all right. Okay. Chris?
So there's a third proposal that for approval that just wasn't covered. It was different from the original papers, which was the earmarked reserves. I just wondered if Joe could expand on that, just so that everyone's clear, because it wasn't in the first one.
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't quite finished yet. Apologies. As Chris has said, there is an approval. We had two accounting errors that happened that we unearthed. One is at the end of last year, there was a carry forward, an underspend on a transport grant and some other grants, just over 8 million. Now, instead of that underspend being transferred to an earmarked reserve to then be used going forward either this year or next, it was treated as a creditor, so i.e. it was owed back to the government department at 31st of March, so it didn't appear in reserves, but it is actually usable for us to be able to spend on further schemes. So that's a technical accounting adjustment, but I need obviously Cabinet to formally approve that I'm transferring that to correct an error, to transfer that from creditors to an earmarked reserves, but it is real funds that we can use and can commit to future schemes. We are working through, I know we're working through with Alan exactly what's going to be spent on or what it's planned originally to be spent on, and we're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's to keep through on that one. And then the other matter relates to the airport, so the interest receivable from the airport. So again, it's another accounting error where it was, so the interest was accrued, both sides of the fence, so we got that bit right, accrued both sides of the fence, but instead of what was then happening, it was transferring into a restricted reserve, which is a sort of more private sector accounting approach, because they follow different accounting rules. We don't use restricted reserves in public sector accounting. We have usable reserves, and we don't have them. The unusable reserves are really unusable reserves. And then what was happening was that Cabinet were not aware, so when you were previously reported on the earmarked reserve, it did not include that restricted reserve, because behind the scenes, finance staff knew they didn't want you to use that because we was not receiving the interest from the airport. The correct accounting is to bring the income in because it is owed to us. If we don't then think we're going to get it, then we provide for a bad debt against that, so there's no impact on the bottom line, and we don't use income or money that we're not going to get. So that's it, again, it's just a correction of an accounting treatment.
Okay. Chris?
Okay, then I think there's probably two things. I think the risks thing is really good, but I wonder if that should maybe go at the end of the report, just so it's part of the considerations, like the financial or legal implications. Maybe risks should be as a consideration at the end, just so that it's in the same place in all reports, and then it means that actually it's consistent. And then the other thing is when we're talking about the airport interest payments, by making that correction, we're not writing off the interest payments, are we, at this point? I'm just sort of thinking, because otherwise it would have to be one of the legal implications, wouldn't it, of the subsidy control. I would like to say I'm much happier with how these are being presented now. It's actually much more clear. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Chris. Can we note the report and approve the recommendations of D, E and H? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that, John. So if we move on to item 8, Treasury Management.
Yes, this is obviously a much more technical report, so I'll try and summarise that and bring out the key points for you. It is just an update, a mid-year update. We're required to do this by law under the Treasury Management Code. Key things for Cabinet to be aware of is our under-borrowed position has reduced quite significantly. We've been able to establish that through some more in-depth work with Arlene Close, our Treasury advisors. There was some element of allowing for that in the budgets. So the extra borrowing, 120 million, we have now started to borrow in 20 million tranches as set out in the report. That will be monitored because one of the things from the Finance Improvement Plan is our cash flow forecasting, which we know we've not been doing terribly well. And so there's lots of improvements happening with the cash flow forecasting. So we will be monitoring those tranche drawdowns that will be up to 140 million. It might not necessarily be 140 million. And again, it does depend on when we receive grants. So we do receive quite lumpy grant funding. So it's when we get that grant funding in, gives us the cash in our coffers, and that might not necessarily align. We might not be paying it out straight away again. So we get the benefit of having that cash in our banks to stop us having to go and borrow. So at the moment, we're going to be borrowing up to 140 million. And as I said, for this year and in the Q2 report, that is affordable. That's not going to push us into an overspend position on our interest payable budget. So that's reasonably good news in that sense. I think what is probably not so good news, which is what we're improving upon, as I said, is the fact that we probably weren't aware at Q1 of that need to go and do that 140 million borrowing. But that, as I said, lots of work been done with Arden Close, who we do rely on heavily. And the other key thing, as I said, it is just a report to note. We're still in line with our prudential indicators, so we haven't breached any of the prudential indicators. They're still all on track. I suppose the significant one is our on-lending now to third parties is at 538 million, but you do have an approved cabinet limit of 654. So even with the current on-lending, we're still within those limits. There also are things like the operational and boundary and the authorised limit, which is the maximum borrowing that we're allowed to do as officers with delegated authority, and neither of those limits. The operational boundary gives you a little bit of headroom, and that would give Cabinet warning, so we need to report back to Cabinet if we're anywhere near that breaching that operational boundary, because then we know we're very fast approaching then our authorised limit, but the operational boundary has not been breached or will not be breached this year.
I think this might be a question for Jodie. We had some discussion in the informal cabinet, the workshops regarding the potential liabilities back to the local authorities of some of the substantial borrowing. I think it's over 500 million in between the airport and the SDDC. You seem to sort of contradict or say that you were looking into it not falling back on the local authorities when it was the fill around and we would never do that. However, you seem to think there could be a scenario where that could fall back. I just wanted to know if we'd had any further clarification on that.
Thank you. So just for clarity, I was referring to whether there is, if there's an issue in regards to a Mayoral Development Corporation unable to balance its budget, where would the liability fall? So I'll be clear on a couple of things. So firstly, constituent councils do not carry direct financial liability for a combined authority. If that combined authority cannot balance its budget, CA is a distinct corporate body, as Steve Ashton given, and established under the Local Democracy Economic Development Construction Act 2009. It operates independently of its constituent council, so that liability isn't there. In regard to a Mayoral Development Corporation, again, where a Mayoral Development Corporation under CA runs a deficit, or it fails to balance the budget, the financial liability would typically then fall back on the combined authority, not on the constituent authorities. So that's an issue, therefore, for the combined authority to consider, and therefore, how it's going to deal with that. Does that provide the clarity? cost.
Well, it doesn't sound the local authorities, but it doesn't sound great for the TVCA though, does it? If one of them, I mean, I don't see there's a future where that happens, but should the STDC, for instance, fall into difficulty, that's a hell of a liability to fall back onto us, as the TVCA.
Yeah, and I think as we discussed in the informal cabinet, Alec, it's something that came out of the Tees Valley review as well, so it's actually detailed within the Tees Valley review that the legal advice received by MHCLG, the initial legal advice that I think each individual, or jointly as local authorities, was received at the time of the establishment of STDC, all correlate. So government legal advice, local council legal advice, and TVCA legal advice at the time all said that those liabilities don't fall back from the Development Corporation to the combined authority. Obviously, where TVCA has made lending to, then obviously there are impacts there, because obviously if that isn't then repaid, then that has an impact on the finances of TVCA as a lender. But that's also one of the pieces of clarification that Jodie just wanted to go. I mean, Jodie's new to the organisation, so Jodie's going back around that loop with MHCLG to get that confirmation.
And just with my STDC hat on, I know we've, as a board, gone to great lengths to ensure that the repayments and the accounting error and stuff has been satisfied, which it has been. So.
Yeah, excellent. Stephen?
Wasn't sure if I completely followed that. So you've just clearly said that we think the advice about STDC is if that collapses, the liability doesn't come back to the combined authority. But did you say that in terms of the other two male development corporations, that if they were to fail, that they would come back to the combined authority? So I was concentrating more because you're talking about does it come back to the local authority, so I was being very parochial. Is there a difference between STDC and MDC and HDC in terms of...
Sorry, that's my misunderstanding, Stephen. So, no, all development corporations are treated the same. There's no legal distinction between STDC or any other development corporation. I was more making the point that during the Tees Valley review, government got legal advice to say that a development corporation is a distinct legal entity in itself, and so the liabilities of a development corporation don't automatically transfer to a combined authority. That's the advice that we got, and that's at the time of the establishment of STDC, because it was the first development corporation. The local authorities got their own legal advice that said as such. I think Joe doesn't have comfort that that's definitely the view in his own mind because he's new to the organisation, so he's again asking for that legal advice and asking MHCLG to reconfirm that position. Is that, I don't want to misrepresent you, Jodie, but I think that's what we're...
So what you weren't saying is there isn't a distinction between STDC and the other two in terms of whatever the answer is to that question.
And just to agree, that's absolutely right. So it's about just clarifying this in my own mind, because obviously if there was ever such a scenario, there would be a closure process for a DC that picks up liabilities. So where we're specifically trying to get guidance is because the new government guidance clarifies that liabilities following closure of a DC would therefore be handled by the CA, but you would handle those liabilities within the closure process. So we're trying to get remote messages full clarity on what that specifically means, because their own guidance is not specifically clear on what that means.
Yeah, I don't want to add to that external legal services, but and I hope you have. But I think as a layman, I would absolutely think it would be imperative we get it in black and white for cabinets to ensure that that peace of mind and for the public as well and reputation as well, that we get that in black and white if possible.
Absolutely. Not to labour the point too much, but from a technical point of view, to follow on from what Jodie says, that if a development corporation was to close, where it has assets or liabilities from a net position, those assets or liabilities need to be put somewhere. So if, let's just say there was £100,000 in the bank, somebody would get that £100,000. It is for the combined authority on winding up to decide where those assets and liabilities sit. But they need to make the law actually says that needs to basically be recommended to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State makes a decision. So what's really interesting about the legal advice is there's a fudge in the legislation that basically says nothing goes anywhere until the CA comes up with a plan that the Secretary of State is happy with. And obviously the CA would have to adopt that plan, which means the local authorities would have to agree with that plan. So basically, again, not to oversimplify the legal advice, but the legal advice we got at the time and MHCLG got at the time is everything stays in a box until basically the CA and government can agree where to distribute either the assets or the liabilities.
See,
But sorry, just before you come back, Alec, I know Joe wants to make an additional point because it's something that Joe's been looking into as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think just adding to that, there also we do need to think about with development corporations, because I do reference it in the Q2 report, is that if you've got a development corporation that has got stranded liabilities or whatever, onerous, liabilities in there, what happens in the meantime in terms of funding to keep that development corporation going? So that's quite a fundamental point I think we need to get to the bottom of. And the only other thing I wanted to add, I've also raised the issue with the external auditors to see what their view is, because obviously they audit up and down the country, other combined authorities, and they actually, it's a bit grey to them as well. So why is that relevant? Because at the moment we prepare group accounts, so it implies that the combined authority is in sort of the parent, and then these are part of our group, our subsidiary group. So then I said, well, if that's the case then surely we shouldn't be producing group accounts if they're standalone, reporting their own right. And they sort of come back and said, well, yes, I guess so. So I said, well, how do you determine that? And they said it's a matter of control. Do you actually control those mayoral development corporations or not? So again, that's something else that Jodie will, when we get the legal advice, we'll have to factor that in. Do we control them or not? That's quite an important question.
See, the bit I struggle with is like from an SDDC point of view, at conception, that was all that land at Tees West was owned by the Crown, but now it's all owned by the sort of private sector as well, and a profitable private sector. So I just want clarification in black and white if we can, just to make sure it's not going to fall back on the taxpayers through this body. And I think that'd be really beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, well, that'll be the legal advice that gets re-clarified again for a number of times. I suppose the only thing, just to correct on Alec, the land was never owned by the Crown. It was always in liquidation, so it was always held with the private company. The liquidator had to manage it on behalf of the liquidated company. And it's a technical point. Actually, one of the key reasons we had to get into the transition, the way that the government signed off the deal in 2020, etc., was because not only did the government want to get rid of the £20-ish million a year liability, but they were also petrified that if the liquidator disclaimed the land, it would go to the Crown, and that's the last thing they wanted. Now, again, not to revisit all of this, but the reason that risk was always very low of it ever going to the Crown is because the liquidator was indemnified by the government, so there was no risk of disclaiming into the Crown. I know it's a technical point, but it's worth just clarifying.
I don't think we're re-clarifying clarification or when our new head of legal financial officers
I'm just making the point about the Crown, and not making the point about the legal advice that we're getting again to just give everybody.
I do know some of the advice given to officers of some of the local authorities contradicts that as well, so it'd be really beneficial to get it into black and white if we can.
Yeah, okay. Okay, are we happy to note that paper? Sorry, Lisa.
Yeah, could I ask if the adult schools will be moved up the agenda, because I'm conscious that I was supposed to go at 11:30, but I've got some things to say on this in support of officers. So can I move that we move that up?
So we'll just notice it wasn't about that item. We're happy to note the Treasury Management item. Thank you. We'll do that. And if others are happy, we'll put that up. Okay, so we'll bring that forward. So we'll move to item. We'll skip transport. We'll come back to it, and we'll come on to item 10. Sorry, Alan.
I've said sorry to Alan already.
Sarah, Jackie, do you want to give a quick?
Can I come in first? If that's all right, Chair.
Yeah, sure.
I know some people may disagree with me on this, but it's probably one of the most collaborative pieces of work that I've been involved with. I said this earlier, but as a cabinet member in Stockton, I would never put anything through that I wasn't 100% happy with, and I'm very happy with this report today. Just to give you some background, it's took a substantial amount of my time doing lots of workshops at the Skills Academy in Alex gone now, but I think it's over in Redcar that I've been going to, and we've held lots of where every local authority has been invited to put the most relevant officer forward that has voting rights that could make decisions. Also included that was the Department of Work and Pensions. Health were in there as well, which I never thought to put health in there, but thankfully the officers did that. And we also put further education colleges in there, now university as well. So it was a massive collaborative piece of work that was very difficult to facilitate, I'll be honest. And all of the relevant officers from local authorities, you were asked to put the most relevant officer forward, the further education colleges, health department, like I've already mentioned. And we had some really collaborative working sessions where we didn't always agree, I can say, but we got there in the end. There was never any indication. It was always unanimous in the vote, and we did that. It was a collaborative piece of work. Now, I'm not going to make any excuses for any organisations or local authorities that didn't put their officers forward, that didn't have those voting rights. And so I'm very happy with this piece of work, to be fair, Chair. And I think probably going to get some feedback on this from others. But I think maybe somebody will need to take that back to their authorities or to their organisations, because actually, although we didn't always agree on some things, and I've got Chris sat by me now that sat there with me, we all came to a unanimous decision with all, and there were some difficult people in the room, I'll say. So I'll hand over to the officers and then happy to take responsibility. And any questions on this? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think just to summarise, in terms of what Lisa's just said, there's been, as I said, been an awful lot of work gone into the shaping of adult skills from the next academic year. And I think the paper really sort of summarises the shift from what is very much now a transactional process to a more transformational process, and having a much more strategic collaboration with our local authorities and colleges to ensure that the skills provision for adults going forward is much better aligned to the needs of our local employers, but also is a much more targeted place-based approach where we need to address some of those challenges across the Tees Valley. In particular, you know, those adults who do not have any qualifications and have, you know, the furthest away from the labour market. So this is a real opportunity to go back to the evidence base that we used in the workshops to really target our adult skills provision and prioritise the programmes where they are best needed. I think that there's still some work going on in the background around the strategic outcome agreement that we'll continue to work with our local authorities and colleges on. We've had a couple of working groups and we're about there on that. I think that's the key shift here, is that we are moving much away from a transactional process to a more transformational, strategic, collaborative process with our key stakeholders in our local authorities and our colleges. If there's any questions.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
No, can I just, absolutely fine. It's late in the day, to be fair, because this has been going on for I don't know how many months, but yeah, happy to take the questions.
Because my technical advice from my lead officer very much contradicts that. They absolutely want to retain the continuity of the funding going to the local authorities. If we go out with tender, there could be a third operator that gets it and breaks up. And again, I'm a layman, and I suppose it goes back to your point earlier about cabinet members maybe taking that on our toes as well and updating each other. But yeah, I'm taking a bullet for my officers here because they're completely contradicting the collaboration thing and saying, well, I'll be supporting option one.
Can I be dead honest? You are taking a bullet, because I know my stuff on this.
Yeah,
I wouldn't bring anything here, and happy for Jackie to or Sarah to feed back on this, but that's absolutely not the case.
Yeah, sorry, Lisa.
No, it's no problem.
Sorry, I think just to clarify, Councillor, is that the proposal is that the local authorities and the colleges are actually taken out of any future procurement process,
and we grant fund them directly, and we agree that funding allocation alongside the adult skills programmes for investment at the local authority level. So that is the proposal, that we actually move away from the current process where all providers have to go through a procurement process, and we are taking them out and grant funding them directly. And the basis will be over a 3-year period, obviously subject to our affordability because we do get our allocations on an annual basis, and that the 26-27, if you like, allocations will be based on the 25-26 year allocations for our grant funded providers.
Chair, can you possibly use that discretion and allow my officer to come in with these technical explanations?
Yeah, I think to be fair, instead of you taking the bullet, I'll let them take it.
Thank you.
And then I can blame Brian then. And his officers because of the role.
Thank you, leaders, for that opportunity. No, we support the proposals in option 1 on page 5 of the report. There were concerns about the learning for inclusion going out to competitive procurement because of the local expertise and existing relationships that local authorities have got. I think that's
Yes.
the crux.
So that's not really happening, I don't think. So just should have read the papers a little bit better and got involved a little bit more. Sorry. But I'll bring Jackie back.
Thank you. So just to clarify that the Learning for Inclusion programme as it is now has been reprioritised to what is now going to be called, or proposed to be called, the Raising Aspirations programme. That will not be going out for procurement. That will be grant funded to the local authorities on a targeted place-based approach, and we'll agree that going forward as part of the strategic conversation.
It's actually, sorry,
Sorry,
Chair.
could you mind just like, I think there's a...
It's actually a better system.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, at the moment the Learning for Inclusion is ring-fenced to local authorities. That ring-fencing for Raising Aspirations has been removed, but it is recognised that the local authorities are best placed, if you like, to strategically plan and deliver the Raising Aspirations programmes going forward in partnership with the relevant delivery organisations such as the voluntary and community sector organisations and local schools, but that the local authorities will be the lead, if you like, on that going forward.
Well, let's just have a pause at the minute and I'll come to Stephen first. And then
Just like, let me sort the leaders out.
I did have a long conversation with Lisa last night, and I think I'm now actually more confused. What I was going to say is, having a conversation with Lisa last night, Lisa was saying very clearly that the consultation and agreement in terms of what was in the report, but equally I've been told by officers back at the ranch that a different view, and generally I don't know what's happened, but there's somewhere along the lines of misunderstanding. But now the explanation that's been given is something completely different to what my understanding was. So I'm really baffled as to whether there's still a genuine concern or whether it has in fact been, because it sounds like it's been replaced with something else, but to what Lisa said earlier, I'm not a technical expert in adult education or this kind of stuff. So I think there is some confusion potentially about what's being proposed. So I think genuinely know whether it's something that's equivalent or something that's...
Yeah, let's everybody take a breath. Let's slow this down and go back to basics. I'm talking to you as well, Lisa. You take a breath as well. Pull those sleeves down. I think it goes back, to be fair, just before you jump in, Lisa, it goes back to the point that I was making at the beginning, that actually there are some really detailed processes that go in behind this, and where a portfolio lead does the fantastic work that you've done, actually officers from across the local authorities for many, many months get involved in a project that then culminates in the process of cabinet. And I must say, having looked at this, because having heard that this was causing some rumblings in the last few days, I've looked at that process, and I agree with Lisa. All local authorities for an extended period of time have been greatly involved in this process. There has been no dissent, there has been no suggestion that the train lines that we were moving along over a multiple month process that's been led by a cabinet member, which is due to culminate in a decision today, which a decision is, cabinet is still a free decision, right? I'm not saying it fetters the decision of cabinet in any way, shape or form. I'm just saying that it would be unfair both on Lisa and the officers at the combined authority to frame this as we have not been engaged on this and it's not clear from us, because I mean, I'll defer to you, Lisa, because I've caught up with this recently, you've been hands-on with it. Is there a suggestion or a potential that there could have been a miscommunication?
It would be down to organisations and the local authority on that, because I think what we ask local authorities, and Jackie will correct me if I'm wrong, and organisations to put the most appropriate person forward, and from FEs and all of our partners, to get the right people around the table that were decision makers. And you know, I look at, I'm not going to name the person from Middlesbrough, who's really challenging, that's on the Skills Council as well, but totally agreed with these, and it's been like that. So I can't take responsibility as a cabinet member, and you can't put it on officers if the right people that you were asked to put around the table weren't there. And I know I'm disagreeing with leaders here to some extent, but this is my portfolio, and I'm really happy with the process of what, and I won't say that I've been along with it all, we've made some amendments, but I've spent a substantial amount of my time working on this at Alex in his local authority at the Skills Academy, and doing these 5 hours and 5 sessions with all partners around the table. Now, you can disagree with it if you want, and like you said, Ben, it is absolutely up to Cabinet to agree or to disagree, but I would not be putting a paper in front of Cabinet if I was not happy with the process. So if some officers or some organisations are saying, we don't think it's been collaborative, I would like some evidence of that.
Chair, if I may, I don't think anybody's...
Sorry, Alex, somebody coming before, and I do want to answer Stephen's question fully first. So, Sarah, Jackie, do you want to come in? Just because I think, to be fair, Stephen is confused, and so if we can try and clear up some of that confusion on the process and on what we're actually in, the recommendations, I think it's... Stephen, do you want to clarify what it is that the issue is?
I think, just to be clear, I'm not criticising anyone here. All I'm saying is that I'm hearing two different views about the same thing. So clearly there's a misunderstanding about what's happened, and Sarah, I think, gave a different interpretation, which is possibly why there's a misunderstanding. And where I'm left today is I genuinely don't know. And part of my puzzlement is that the people that talk to me, I believe them both, and yet they're saying very different things. And somewhere in that process, we end up in a situation where clearly people have a different view about what's being recommended.
So I will try to summarise what we're recommending. My view is clear in paper, but if we need to make an amendment or anything to make that, to provide that clarity, then we can. So, and Jackie, please correct me if any of this is wrong. So we are proposing that for all of the adult skills funding, which includes all 3 pots now, so that's the level 3 courses for jobs funding, the skills bootcamp funding, and the old adult education budget, is commissioned in 2 separate ways. One is where it's a Tees Valley provider that meets the requirements, which basically covers all of our colleges, our local authorities, and the university. We will no longer expect them to bid through a procurement process. We will work on a strategic plan collaboratively, and that's a 3-year strategic plan. Currently, we can only commit the actual pounds and pence on an annual basis because that's when we get them. But hopefully, if that changes, we can do that over multiple years. We will agree that strategic plan, working with you all. And that will be the start of an ongoing conversation. So the point of having a strategic plan is that we've set out a framework here about the types of provision that needs to be delivered. But actually, it is down to you and the providers to have the flexibility to respond to need. And it is not our business to get involved in that. We agree the strategic plan. And I think an important point to note is that what we're asking Cabinet for today is approval of this approach. What will come back to Cabinet in March is approval of the actual financial allocations. So that will come back for a decision in March. Around what was called inclusion, and it is now called raising aspirations, What we did in this process is we all revisited the evidence base around what we're trying to change here with this funding, because ultimately we don't have enough to do everything that we want to do. And one of the indicators which has not changed over a number of years, and is something that we all agree is really important, is that 8% of Tees Valley residents do not have any qualifications. Now, we all recognise that actually some of those residents may be quite far from getting a qualification, and this framework still allows us to provide support to those individuals, but it also, we do need to measure ourselves to make sure that we're actually getting some positive outcomes and changing those economic indicators for Tees Valley. So the activity that's been delivered previously can still be delivered. We will not be going out to procure private providers to deliver that activity. The only reason we have removed the ring fence is because there is a different approach across Tees Valley. So if I may use Hartlepool as an example, they work really closely with the community voluntary sector. So actually, this is absolutely not about us going to the open market. This is about us, again, within that strategic plan, determining the best approach to reach those residents, because ultimately this is all about reaching the residents and the quality of the provision they're getting. Now, that could mean that actually the local authorities deliver 90% of it, but actually there's another organisation that might be working with a cohort of people that have an existing relationship with them, and therefore it makes much more sense to take it to those people. So the removal of the ring fence is not about taking money from the local authorities, it's about providing us the flexibility when we have those conversations to decide who is best to deliver it. I think it's also important to note, and this is set out in the paper, that there is a commitment to maintain the allocations in this year, providing we receive the money from government over the next year, so we do have time to have those conversations about taking that really place-based approach. The only provision that will go out to procurement is actually where it's specialist, employer-led, and actually we don't have a Tees Valley provider who can deliver that. So the kind of two actions to take if Cabinet agrees this approach is that in the new year, we'll be working very closely with all of your teams to develop those strategic plans that fit with this framework, and making sure that we're taking a place-based approach. And when everything comes back here in March, again, we just need to make sure that we're working with the right people within the local authorities when we do that. When we come back in March, it will be very clear to Cabinet how much is being grant funded to each of you, as well, each of the Tees Valley providers. So we're not asking for that decision now, there will be another opportunity to actually look at the numbers. Has that provided the clarity, Councillor Harker, or is there anything else?
It has, in the sense that I think what you said earlier I misunderstood, but I think now what you've said isn't very far away from what I thought my understanding was, and hence I'm still confused about the local authorities and what's coming in paper. It seems to be, because I'm a misunderstanding about it, or there's a disagreement about it, and I generally have no idea which is it. Quite least, I'm not the person in the room to be having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you in next time, but I'm going to use my prerogative to ask Lisa a question, because I can't ask the officers this question. Is this a situation where local authorities are just being very protective over basically a direct grant budget that they don't have to account for or be responsible for, and now all of a sudden they have to submit plans to get the money that they're probably going to get anyway? Or am I misunderstanding that?
I think it's easier than that, to be fair then. I think so. Previously, where you've had to put in for the money, we've been very strategic about keeping the money in the Tees Valley. So, for example, I'm looking across to my colleagues at Hartlepool, like, I sit on here from the Tees Valley, I'm not Stockton, although I'm very protective of Stockton, and we will lose out to Hartlepool, where we look at a ward level and we look at where money is needed, and we can put that into communities and to community assets and to community providers, rather than, so it is, I worked in this sector for a long time as well, it is a much better system that we're proposing now. I think what And I had cabinet last night, which was challenging, Ben, as you can imagine. And then I sat with Steve for 45 minutes on the phone last night to try to explain it to him. And it's last minute. And what we're trying to do is the best for skills across the Tees Valley. It isn't about local authorities. It's about our people across the Tees Valley. Their skills, their ability to work, the soft skills. I had a brilliant item at Cabinet last night about one of our providers, and Craig was there, and it isn't just about employment, although we need those numbers. It's about soft skills, giving people confidence, looking at an award level basis and saying, what is the skills of those people? What do we need in the Tees Valley? You won't get a better plan than this.
Sorry, thanks for being patient, Alec.
Yeah, I don't need to learn on my work you've done, Lisa. I completely have trusted you. However, I am being parochial in the reason when I'm talking about our bottom line. The fact that, Lisa, you just said Stockton loses out with Hartlepool gains from this, and I have no idea if Redcar gains or doesn't gain. I don't know that bottom line. I've got a number there that I'm seeing. And I'm looking at offer advice. So just on that pretense, can I ask that it's deferred?
Can I also just say...
Can I just ask that it's deferred when I get an understanding?
Can I just I suppose, a piece of helpful clarification for you, Alec. You can't have a number from any officer because the decision hasn't been made yet.
No, I've got a number of what we've got at the minute. That's what I mean.
No, that's fine. But even today, we're not allocating numbers, right? We're allocating a process that would come.
I'm not fully briefed on this to vote for it, other than the information I got 2 days ago. Can I ask for a deferment?
Well, hang on. I'll come back to the officers on the process around that. Pam's first, and then.
I mean, the first thing I'd like to do is second Lisa's proposal for Hartlepool to benefit from it.
I'm sure you would.
And we should all definitely vote for that. I think there are two things going on out there. There's the process, and then there are the recommendations. I think in terms of the process, I remember last year's process, and there seemed to be hell on everywhere in every quarter. So this process that has not reached me in any way. So this has obviously been a much more inclusive process, and lots of different people have been engaged in coming out with the strategy and the outcomes. So that is, for you to be commended on that, Lisa, and the officers involved in that. I think the two things that have been fed back to me from my officers who've been involved in the process, and they've fed this back to both Jackie and Sarah already, were around the two things, the learning inclusion and the ring fencing, and also the making sure that was the addition of that the inclusion of some of the softer outcomes was still there. What I can say is, and I know because I spoke to you yesterday about this, Sarah, and you reassured me, and then I think for my money and for Hartlepool's money, I think you have sufficiently reassured everybody in this room that will be the case. I think it is definitely a more favourable way of working for lots of different partners, and I think the reassurance that you've all given publicly that local authorities won't be in a worse position is enough for me to support this and to vote for it. And I think we can do that today because, as has been said, we're not really agreeing the amounts here, we're agreeing the process, and I think there's enough here for us to be able to do that.
Thanks, Pam. Chris?
So I'm supportive of option one. I think wherever I can, I obviously choose needs-based because it's the right thing to do, and I think there's probably just some clarity which we don't need to amend at this point because I think we'll do it in future times, but it's the 3.31 in option one. I think that's giving everyone nervousness. If I'm honest, if we're changing the name of the pot as well, it's still the old name as it stands in that paragraph, so it is a case that actually if we were going to split hairs, it's probably just the wording of how that's gone. If it was more like 3.30, where that, in my opinion, gives a much a better description of how it works with the local authorities and stuff, it feels a bit better. But I think it's more wording than it is misunderstanding to some degree. So no, supportive of option one.
Option one.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'm sorry, I was just reflecting here. So, I thought I was clear on what was going on, and now I'm slightly confused. Can we just be clear, really clear on the because the people throwing around different options here. There are recommendations within the paper. I think we need to be really clear about the recommendations that we're asking Cabinet to vote on, rather than throwing in different options.
Point of order, Chair, we did ask if we could have a deferment.
I'm not willing to defer this.
No, okay.
I think we need to move on with it, and I suspect, well, actually, I think that's a fair question. I'm not keen to, but my reasoning with that is there's a process to go through to award ahead of the next year.
And come back in March, the numbers on it. Yeah. So we're just asking for the process now, not the numbers.
No, I get that.
I would be.
I suppose for fullness, for completeness sake, and for Councillor Brown to get an answer out of that, though, as to asking for the deferment, the question is, what is the consequence of deferment? I really look at Jackie and Sarah on this about what if there was a deferment, what would be the impact on the process?
Would it have to be a business meeting we deferred it to, or can we make the decision by proxy in the next informal cabinet workshop?
No, there wouldn't have been a cabinet decision, so it would have to be a cabinet meeting that makes
There
sense.
would have to be a business decision.
No, sorry, just before that, I just want to ask this question on what happens if there was a deferment.
The consequence of the deferment is that we can't start the strategic planning process, so we won't be able to make the allocations in March.
Right.
So it will delay grant funding to local authorities.
Okay. Withdraw that request.
I think that's again it's helpful to get that. So I appreciate that, Alex. And that's fine. That's withdrawn. Chris.
I just suppose if it would make people a bit more comfortable, there is a delegation there, recommendation D, and sometimes if there is a bit of a wanting to build a bit of trust in the process, you can sometimes add in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder into the delegation. And I know that's something that we would do if there was a case where we weren't feeling quite comfortable on it, but then we give Lisa a bit more grip to make sure that she's involved with the process as it goes forward. And I think that might be a way forward. And then we all trusted Lisa.
I'm more than involved with the process.
No, I just think it's a formal way of recognising that.
Absolutely.
If we get an issue, refund us, Lisa.
I'll come back to that point. That's all right, Chris. Denise?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. I think the issue might be in the recommendation. It doesn't refer to either of the options. It actually just talks about Section 3 and Appendix 1, and I think that's where the confusion is. I don't think the recommendation is clear, which is why people are referring to option 1, which is actually included in Section 3 of the report.
Yes. And that is option 1 is the recommended option.
I just think the recommendation.
And we'll take all of the feedback in terms of the clarity of the report.
Yeah, so under 3.15, it then goes further down at 319 and says it is recommended for approval. It possibly could have been clearer in the actual front page recommendation, but it does follow through from the papers that is the preferred recommendation. But thanks for the clarification, Denise, appreciate it. Right, so on that basis then, unless anybody has anything else they want to add.
Okay, other than we've got to leave at 12, we've got an Ofsted in children.
Right, okay, well, unless anybody has anything they want to add, my view is that we approve the recommendations as set out in A, B, C and D of the paper. But I'm happy to take on board Chris's view that in the delegation, we add to the delegation in consultation with the portfolio lead being Lisa, to be able to shape that so that then we can start that process and bring the allocations to the March Cabinet.
Yeah.
Are people happy to agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's okay, Stephen.
In a sense, no, but the nervousness is about the concern is, and I think I asked the question about this informal cabinets about. We talked a lot in informal cabinets about some of the more technical formal training that we need to use to upskill people. And the question asked was about we mustn't miss out and create a gap beneath that if people are struggling. And one of the examples that I was given, someone that's been helped through this process, was a woman who was not leaving the house because she was fearful of doing so. She had some training done at home to give her confidence that enabled her to leave the house. She's volunteering in a local school. She's ended up getting a TA qualification, and she's now in work. That kind of person is really, really vulnerable. And if we mess this up and that funding isn't used for that purpose, because either there's not a focus on anyone particular to deliver it, and that's important about why we sometimes leave fund services. Individuals such as those will never get on the careers ladder, and always one of the opportunities that we're creating in the Tees Valley for low-paid jobs, that kind of person will still be sat at home, unable to go out of the house, and they will miss out. It sounds
so I think
very emotional, but that's the important. That was what was being raised about it being ring fence, is to make sure that somebody has a responsibility to do things with people like that.
So I think what we've got today, Stephen, is reassurance that despite the changing of the ring fencing, that is still the ambition and the aspiration of Cabinet. That's been very clear direction given to Lisa as part of the delegation. So I think we've recorded that that is approved. So I'm nodding from everybody. I don't know whether you want to approve or...
No, I'm not going to abstain on it,
but we'll definitely take that into consideration.
What I'd just say to you, an absolute assurance from me, this new process will help people like that more.
Okay, that's brilliant. That's passed then. Thank you very much. I think Alex running off.
Yeah, we have to go through Ofsted calls.
Ofsted calls, and Ofsted calls in confidence. And you having to go as well, Lisa?
I'm only half. Well, I'll be in my but yeah, thank you.
You can stay.
Good business.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. And thanks for that help, Lisa. Thanks for that discussion. Right, we'll go back to item 9, the transport programme update.
Where we cut out Stockton and...
I wish I was staying for this.
Okay, thanks, Chair. There's 2 parts to this report. The first part relates to the capital programme, and in particular, the first element of this is around the Middlesbrough Station Undercroft, which is a project that's been in construction, and obviously we've invested a significant amount of capital in bringing that forward and creating new business units within that. So the first recommendation relates to TBCA, the proposal for TBCA to enter into a head lease for those units that are being created on a peppercorn lease kind of basis, taking the responsibility of those from Network Rail. They're happy to do that on the basis of recognising our kind of capital investment. The peppercorn rent is on the basis of it being a not-for-profit, which very much fits with the aspiration around the Development Corporation, around the Cultural Quarter aspirations, and being able to put creative businesses into that space. The second part of the capital report relates to the Levelling Up Fund, the recommendation around the Levelling Up Fund, which is for active travel schemes within Tees Valley. And as a reminder, we secured this funding 3 years ago to deliver these schemes based on nearly £17.8 million of LUF funding, plus a contribution from our CRSTS programme. As you members will be aware, there's obviously been a period of kind of construction inflation over this kind of period, and there have also been challenges with particularly one of the schemes because of some incidents on the highway, which have caused some kind of challenge to deliver that, and particularly a structure along the route. So the recommendation within this is around increasing by a small amount the CRSTS. We'll manage that within the existing CRSTS programme, and agreement to commit to business case, for the business cases that are being prepared will be ready to go in January for those schemes. But recognising that the scheme that is the Middlesbrough South Bank scheme is a really important connectivity, and therefore actually looking to include that within the main capital investment programme. And so effectively deferring one of those schemes into the programme and seeking to include that within other kind of funding moving forward, so that we deliver out that scheme as well. Do you want me to pause there, Chair, or do you want me to go straight into the revenue programme as well?
When you say revenue programme, you mean the PCV programme, not the, yeah. No, I think it's probably worth splitting them out, otherwise it'll confuse things. So if we put the BSIP funding to one side, has anybody got comments or questions for Alan on the other recommendations? No? Chris?
I'm just sort of curious why we haven't yet included, because we're trying to get rid of the Martin scheme potentially and replace it with a sort of greenways scheme, which is less disruptive to road users and just would be better all over. Is there a reason we haven't managed to bring it forward for this paper, and if so, which paper will it be coming in?
So the aim at the moment on that one is for discussion at March Cabinet. Councillor Cookham will have the follow-on discussions from the deferred items that we've had on workshop. So the intention is to have an informal discussion around all of the programme in order to kind of take that forward. So happy to pick that up later on.
Thank you.
These are the particularly items that we have to commit this funding by March, the levelling up fund. So we're in that kind of business case. So these are the ones that are the most deliverable schemes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think on that basis, just to split it out as well, if people are happy to approve the recommendations A, B and C.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are approved. And I suppose just to clarify for the record, Julie has just confirmed with Zemo that we are still core despite not being told that Ali we're not going to be here for some of the meeting. There we are. Okay, back to you then, Alan, on to the revenue stuff.
Yeah, thank you. So the revenue element particularly relates to the bus service improvement plan, or basic funding, or local authority bus grant, as it is now kind of called. Subsequent to the papers being issued, ironically the following day, the funding was actually confirmed. So just for clarity, the announcement made last Friday is for just a shade under £26 million over a 3-year period. So just over £8.6 million per annum. It is a 3-year funding settlement, which is helpful when we've had annual settlements in the past, but it is subject to annual confirmation. So that's something to just be aware of. We are still waiting official kind of guidance or any further info, but that is obviously the progress that has been made subsequent to this element. In relation to the recommendations in the report, the first one, members will be aware that we are supporting a number of bus services across the whole of Tees Valley. At the moment there's 13 supported services, and that's detailed within the paragraphs within the report. And the recommendation is to continue those on a temporary basis until July. That enables us to take stock of the new funding announcement, the flexibility and the freedom from a 3-year programme in order to bring forward a programme for that 3-year period. The second recommendation E, relates to that, and the proposal is that is something, the development of that longer term proposal is managed through Transport Committee, and we'll work with Councillor Harker and the Transport Committee to bring forward that proposal for the long term allocation of that funding, and that will come forward for March's Cabinet to move forward. And then finally the third element of this is around Tees Flex, which members will be aware as currently is contracted to the end of March, and the decision needs to be made about moving forward with Tees Flex. As per the recommendation, there are a number of options. One is to continue Tees Flex using 4.65 of that allocation to continue as is. There is an opportunity as set out to try and reduce the cost of that by making some changes to the likes of the fares, the amount of pre-booking period, and limiting the usage so that it doesn't, users can't book Tees Flex when there is another viable commercial opportunity. The other alternatives in the recommendation are around discontinuing, which, like I say, is where we are at the moment, with the current contract coming to an end on the 31st of March. And there is an option within that where we have done some analysis of the most high usage of Tees Flex, looked at where there are existing supported bus services, looked at where there are commercial services, and identified some of those gaps. And there are proposals in there, if that's the option that Cabinet chooses, to seek to introduce from the 1st of April 2 new fixed route services, one particularly around Hartlepool and the other around Darlington, Stockton, East Darlington, West Stockton, to look at the gap in provision there. And that's something that, if Cabinet wishes to choose that option, we believe that we can get in for the 1st of April.
Thanks, Alan. Go on, Pam.
Oh, I wish that I had joined this cabinet in the next meeting or the meeting after. I just wanted to pick up on the Tees Flex issue. I mean, I think a slight disappointment really is that there wasn't a clear sort of steer from the transport group about a preferred option. I think that certainly would be helpful. And on this occasion, I am putting my Hartlepool hat on. What I should say up front though is that what a wonderful government to give us a 3-year settlement. But in terms of the options that would be right for Hartlepool, I think, and I've spoken to the members who were on at the transport subgroup from Hartlepool, and I've spoken to the director, because transport isn't, as Lisa said earlier on, I think it's not I'm rapidly trying to get up to speed with the transport issue. But in those briefings, for us, the option would be to cease with Tees Flex and to actually go with the fixed route. So obviously the route A, and if we could extend that to a little bit of Burbank, that would be even better. But I think on the basis of, I look at it very much from a business perspective and in terms of value for money for the public person. If we are looking at 4.65 million for that service, and actually that comes at around about a unit cost of £20 per head, we can, if we didn't deliver that service, we could install those 2 routes for a total cost of around 1.3 million over the 3 years. And that still gives us over 3 million for us to look at an option for Redcar or to explore other options. It might even be that there's a Tees Flex Lite, I don't know. But I think for me, just on a purely financial basis, and I wasn't around in the original discussions, I'm catching up on this one. For me and the people in my town, that is the option that would be the preferred option.
Thanks, Ben. Stephen, and then I'll come to Chris.
Thanks, Ben. Just to pick up the point that there wasn't feedback from Transport Committee. I think at the time Transport Committee had the discussion, we were still awaiting the funding settlement, so we were being asked questions where we didn't really know what was available in terms of resourcing. Notwithstanding that, I think there was a general view on Transport Committee, and I share that view, that in terms of the cost of Tees Flex and the service it delivers, it is questionable as to whether that's in terms of the duty we have to do in terms of best value of the money that we spend and providing a best service from that money. It is questionable whether it is being achieved in that. As Pam has indicated, the subsidy per journey is somewhere shy of £19.50 per journey. I think it's only meeting something like 63% of booking requests. Only 36% of the time does the bus have more than one person on. Half the time it's actually running with nobody on it. So it's very difficult to see or to justify how that service can be argued as best value. But clearly, the Transport Committee Conservative is nonetheless providing a service to some people in the Tees Valley. It is used by some people. I think the reason I support what Pam suggested is that we look at the option, it's the final option in terms of not continuing the service, but do 2 things really. One is the report suggests 2 specific services that we would start up by, I think it's July time, but that we also use the intervening period to look further into the data that we have, because in not continuing that service, it will free up some money that we can use to do a number of other things, including potentially more fixed services. I think 2 services that are identified in the report have come out simply because, although there's a lot of data that we don't have in terms of understanding why people are using Tees Flex, we clearly understand where there's heavy usage between locations, and that's allowed the 2 suggested routes that are included in the report as an option. I think further work is required, both to understand the Tees Flex data, but also of information that we can use to determine where there are gaps that we can potentially probably provide either extensions or new fixed routes to provide a service across the Tees Valley. And I think I'd conclude with that response-led services such as Tees Flex are, generally speaking, always expensive to run, and they aren't always necessarily the best solution. Because it's not ideal, but practicalities, and as we've learned through the Transport Committee and the data that's been provided through Ireland's team, it does nonetheless come with a lot of difficulties in terms of providing services actually practically useful for as many people as possible. So I think that's the only option, only recommendation where there's an option to choose on, but that's I think the right decision for us to do is to discontinue T-Flex, instigate those two services and to do further work that the report alludes to in terms of identifying how we can then use the emerging money services that will free up.
Thanks, Stephen. Chris?
Just for clarity, is it a case that we could only ever tender for a 3-year contract for T-Flex? Okay, so I understand the work that's going on, and I understand the fact that we're trying to move towards a proper sustainable transport system, and this feels like we're then putting money into a solution which feels at that point, if we're trying to achieve that, a bit legacy, because we'll have that running, and as we're trying to build up the sustained routes that hopefully replace some of those journeys, that'll still be running alongside taking all that money. And the one that really sort of gets and sticks at me is it costs £1 per kilometre while empty, which just doesn't feel right. I don't know how we can sort of justify that, and all the statistics that Stephen rightly raised will just get worse, I assume, as we try and bring in more routes, but our ability to bring in more routes will be hampered by the fact that we're into a 3-year contract, which is essentially not doing what we need it to do. So it's difficult, but I think it's really difficult to, if we continue as we are not moving towards a proper, sustained public transport system, and I think that's where we need to be. And I think that's the ambition, and hopefully in the future that's the paper that will bring.
Okay. Anything else from that? No? Okay. Well, from my point of view, let's go through each recommendation. So I think from the recommendations D and E, we can agree with the recommendations in D and E.
So I'll just find them back in the...
That's fine, then feel free to double check Stephen as well. Yep. And then if we move on to F, we've got 2 recommendations. The first being the re-tendering, re-procurement of a T-Flex model. I think in defence of T-Flex, I think it is a good model. I think it can be better. I think there are significant improvements that can be made, and I think the officers have put in suggestions as to how that can be done around fares, pre-booking, usage, etc., etc. So that's the first recommendation. So we're going to take these, depending on how the first one goes in turn. So the first recommendation is to continue the T-Flex model with the changes as been suggested by officers as part of that procurement for a 3-year stint. I'm happy to agree to that. So I agree to that. Does anybody not agree to that?
Yes.
Stephen?
Disagree, yes.
And there's no way to get 3 years down at all? Because it feels to me like the operator is absolutely trying to have us.
No, the challenge is the vehicles are effectively life expired, and therefore to kind of bring new vehicles on the minimum contract that they would be able to get those vehicles for is that kind of period. We've been through an exercise of a pre-tender market engagement, and that was very much the feedback from the operators. The minimum contract is 3 years. If we put anything else out there, we wouldn't get bids for it.
Right, so I'm supporting that option. Pam said no, Stephen said no, Chris?
No, I can't support.
No? Okay. So that decision hasn't passed, so the alternative option is for, as set out in the paper as the alternative option, which includes this proposed route A and route B. I think Pam, you're saying that you're supporting that?
I'm support that one.
Yeah. Given that T-Flex is no longer an option, we have to spend the money, we have to use it wisely, so support that as well. So we'll pass that alternative recommendation. Okay. So is there anything else from you, is there? Anything else from that? Okay, so we'll skip back over our skills budget and we'll go on to item 11, investment zones. It says this is from, the paper says it's from you, Sarah, but I assume the reason Charlie's in this because Charlie's presented the paper. Yeah, please Charlie, go. Yeah.
So I won't rehearse what's in the paper. I think just to remind people that we've been working on the investment zone in partnership with government and with Teesside University since 2023. It's very much been a co-design process throughout that time with 2 successive governments. Cabinet accepted the investment zone into the investment plan in March this year, and that included the sectoral focus, the sort of the broad scope terms and the investment pillars. And then the investment zone was formally signed off by government in May this year. So since then we've been working to mobilise the research and innovation work that Teesside University is going to be leading on, and to progress the capital commitment to the film studios, whilst also then looking at the overarching vision and missions that will guide all of the decision making, and the nature of the business support that's available, the nature of other activity and interventions that will be delivered through the investment zone. So they're detailed within the paper, and the approach to then working on the detailed design of the programme is set out in the paper as well. To inform both of those approaches, we've been working closely with industry partners, with businesses, with the university, local authority colleagues, and I did just want to thank Cabinet members and Chief Execs for their contribution at the workshop that took place on the 28th of November, and we took on board some of the feedback from that and updated the paper on that basis.
Thanks, Charlie. Questions or comments for Charlie? Pam?
It wasn't really a question, just that one of the things that we, or that I think I raised it at the workshop, excuse me, was around the engagement in the governance structure. It is referenced later on in the report, but just specifically in the governance section, the need for us to sort of have that second tier of engagement in terms of, absolutely business board, and I would hope that the portfolio lead is involved in that bit of the process, but also it's about the next level in terms of officers and members and making sure that we're all pushing in the same direction, particularly I think in relation to Middlesbrough and Hartlepool, where a lot of the investment's going to go. I think that'll be beneficial. It's just to really crystally say that bit in the governance section.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll work really closely with you on that.
Sorry about that. Anything to add? No. The only thing I would say, just from a process point of view, and I don't know if it's been drafted in this way in a particular way, but it says to endorse rather than approve. I don't want to get all bureaucratic on us, but is that the right terminology, to endorse rather than approve? Given that all of the recommendations are in approval? I'm looking at, I suppose,
We can endorse the approval.
Looking at Tom and Jodie as to whether we should actually be approving the vision and the documentation. I know that's a really pedantic point, but
you're right. I think it should be approved.
Right. Okay. So on that basis, can we approve? If you want to endorse, you can as well. But can we approve A and B as the recommendations in that item, please? Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 12. Can I just ask Sarah for you to leave the room, please? That's okay. Thank you. Come on, I'm sure we'll come and call you in a minute. So we're moving on to item 12. We've got papers there for the appointment, the senior appointments and the approval of the new Director of Infrastructure and the Director of Business Solutions. Obviously we've been through a pretty extensive process. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Tom, about the process that we've been through, or Stephen, who very kindly stepped in at the last minute to help us on both of these, rather than just the one that he volunteered to do.
Yeah, just to say we've obviously run an external, very rigorous process that involved colleagues around this table, and I'm really pleased with the two proposed candidates that we're putting forward. I think they're both very strong and will really add to our senior leadership team in the combined authority.
And I just want to put on record the thanks to obviously all the officers and the panellists and the stakeholders that were involved in all the panels, but also, like I said, I jokingly say it, but into particular Councillor Harker, both for the volunteer work he did on the infrastructure appointment, but then sticking on for the business solutions appointment, so that was very much appreciated, thank you. Any comments or questions on this? People happy to approve?
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed, okay, thank you. Helpful, Craig, do you mind? Yeah, thank you. Right, governance items. Jodie, item 13. Councillor.
Thank you, sir. Item 13, Independent Remuneration Panel. The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet approval for the establishment of an Independent Remuneration Panel, or IRP, to undertake a detailed review into allowances at the combined authority. The report sets out the rationale for establishing a new IRP, an updated scope that accounts for the organisation improvement plan, comparative data and evolving legislation, particularly the bill currently going through Parliament. The report also proposes an approach to membership of the IRP. Cabinet is asked to establish an independent remuneration panel as detailed in section 3 of the report, approve the scope of the review of the independent remuneration panel as detailed in section 4 of the report, and approve the membership arrangements for the panel as detailed in section 5 of the report. In regard to those membership arrangements, Cabinet is asked to agree approach to chairing of the panel, which is set out in paragraph 5.4, and Cabinet is also asked to agree in that recommendation the panel allowances are set out in paragraph 5.5 and 5.6. The report is as tabled, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions, comments? Seems pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. Yeah, people happy to agree item 13? Yeah, thank you.
Can I just get, just on that chairing element, just a decision from the Cabinet, and whether you want the chair to be from within the panel membership provided by the constituent authorities, or whether you want that chair position to be an independent expert separately recruited.
What would you recommend?
My advice would be to take the chair from within your own panel membership.
So I'm relaxed, that's it. Are you happy with that, guys? Yeah. So we'll agree with that. Sorry, Jodie, thank you. Item 14?
So item 14 is assurance framework. So the purpose of this report is to set out the justification for the development of a single assurance framework that will replace the existing local assurance framework. The report seeks endorsement of the proposal to develop a SAF, as it's referred to, and seeks endorsement of design principles that will inform its development. Cabinet is therefore asked to endorse the approach to create a single assurance framework, the design principles for the development of that single assurance framework as set out in paragraph 3.20. The next step following this would be engagement on the new assurance framework life cycle content, and a draft assurance framework will be developed and brought forward for consideration to this Cabinet in early 2026. The report is as tabled, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Again, do we dynamics, can we change that to approve rather than endorse again?
We can, yes. We'll take that
Okay, we have to approve the two recommendations?
Yeah.
Just on
so
business case development, there's a part where it says due diligence on it as it moves through, but in most of the others it's not really sort of highlighted when that happens. So actually new funding opportunities, new ideas, moving to concept and documentation, moving to the strategic process, and they can get all the way through to the pipeline, but actually I assume there's due diligence at some point. Yeah. But it's not inferred anywhere, so is it a case, does that need to be included somehow or somewhere reference?
So that will be included obviously in the document we'll bring forward to you. So I'm assuming you're referring to the appendix and the guidelines and that. Yes, so there will always be due diligence at every stage, and obviously the actual assurance framework document will set out the specifics around who's going to undertake that and to what standard and level that would be. Specific reference in the guide bit to that due diligence is a green book reference, which is why it's specifically in there. But I can absolutely assure you on that point that will be the case in the document that will be brought forward for adoption.
And then my other point would be, so if we take Joe's paper as an example last time, we have as well as the sort of the monetary value where decision making is happening, but also violence. It doesn't seem to be that there's a process for violence or even like a summary list for them. So I think as well as us taking a sort of anything under $1 million or anything over $1 million, this is what it needs and what it flags, but actually violence should also be considered somewhere, even if it's a summary document. I think it needs to be a consideration.
Yeah, and I completely agree. There are a number of other things as well in terms of who can take a decision on borrowing, who can take decisions on lending. It could be that even if it's £100,000, it still needs to be a cabinet decision if you're going to lend to somebody. So there's a whole raft of things that need to be considered in that revised scheme of delegation. which we will work on, but I think Jody just wants to immediately get this threshold on.
And all of those things are to be included in the scheme delegation with the Constitution. So the assurance framework specifically will refer to approval delegations for business cases, or how we potentially want to advance particular strategic objectives or interventions, which could, of course, be commissioning, it could be expressions of interest, it could be open calls, etc. But those things you've just raised there, they would be picked up in the scheme of delegation in the Constitution. But we would cover all of those as a result of that.
Okay. Happy to agree? Yeah, okay, agreed. Thank you very much. And then back to you, Jodie.
So this is a report on the Constitution. So the purpose of this report is to set out a number of proposed amendments or additions to the Combined Authority Constitution for consideration and approval. The Organisation and Improvement Plan recognised the requirement to review the Constitution and enhance it in line with best practice. This report sets out the proposed structure for a revised Constitution alongside a number of enhancements. Paragraph 3.8 of the report sets out the intended structure of the Constitution within the review I am currently undertaking. Paragraph 3.9 to 3.27 provides detail of the proposed decision-making article and amendment to the key decision definition that I want to particularly draw to your attention. 3.27 sets out some feedback provided both formally and informally by members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on that Appendix A. The Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Committee is present today and can, of course, answer any questions you may have regarding that process. 3.28 to 3.37 sets out the detail for the proposed public code of conduct. And Cabinet is therefore asked to approve Article 1, decision making attached to Appendix A, and approve in principle the public code of conduct attached to Appendix B, subject to its review by the Audit and Governance Committee, who will report back to Cabinet in January 26 regarding that feedback provided by ANG. It's a report as tabled and happy to take any questions.
Chris?
This feels like it was a test if I was reading it or not. But to page 256, it refers to WMCA in unreasonable conduct rather than TVCA.
I'll pick that error up, and there's a reason for that. So we've actually developed this alongside WMCA. They have now already adopted this, and so it's been a joint effort, and we've utilised Helen Edwards, who's on the independent advisory board and that expertise there to help develop. That's an error in drafting where we've done it as a joint effort, so we will pick that up.
And I assume all the way it says insert link and the rest of it will be corrected once we get past the audit stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can I just ask, just again for completeness sake, in the recommendation B, the approval in principle, what does that mean in standing? What's the standing of that? So if we approve this, it goes to audit and governance, they'll report back to us in January with their feedback. Do we then have to approve, or is it already an approval as of today?
You would have the opportunity to note that feedback, and if you wanted then to take that feedback on board,
right,
you could then take a different decision.
Right, okay. It is an approval as of today,
It is, yes.
And then we're seeking that feedback, which means...
You'll have it brought back again.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. Okay, people happy to agree? Yep. Thank you. Both recommendations? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then item 17, delegate decisions, Jodie.
We've got 16, sorry, governance and appointments page.
Oh, sorry.
Just before.
Getting impatient. Sorry. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, governance and appointments, sorry.
So this report sets out a number of appointments to be noted, ratified or approved by the Combined Authority Cabinet. Cabinet is asked to consider the report and the recommendations A to D.
Any comments or questions? Seems pretty straightforward to me. People like to agree the recommendations? Yes? Excellent, thank you very much. Cheers, Craig.
And then finally,
yes.
17 delegated decisions.
17.
So the purpose of this report is to provide Cabinet with detail of all the delegated decisions made since they last met on the 26th of September. Cabinet is asked to note the delegated decisions signed since that meeting and an opportunity, of course, to answer any questions.
So, hello, Chris.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, I assume they're all upstanding, but there is a bit of a discrepancy between when there is a politician, a portfolio holder, or the mayor signing some of the delegates. I'm just wondering if it's a case that we're moving towards a standard format where it's either in consultation with cabinet or portfolio lead, or otherwise it just doesn't feel like it's consistent. And then for some of them, there is an extra section where it says date reported to X, and those are often left blank. And I just wondered if it was a case that these were at a moment in time before that process is probably completed, and I just wondered if we are taking them at the right point, if that's the case.
So on the first point, on the consistency, we've had a conversation about this and where we're picking that up. So technically, of course, cabinet members cannot approve in regards to delegated authority as a lead member. That delegated authority sits elsewhere, so it is in consultation with. So we need, and we will obviously be picking that up in the new decision note process that's coming out as part of the governance review and the new publication scheme. On your second point, sorry, could you just explain that to me slightly?
So if we take, I'm trying to find a random one. If we take the decision for the 3rd of October, the officer was Sarah Cowley, and it was the Freeport minutes. Right at the end, where it says where the signatures are, then it says key decision, date circulated, officer name, deadline date funds can be released. So all of those items are seemingly left blank. And I just wondered if it's not needed, it's not. And there's also date reported to management group. I assume if those things are not needed, we should probably stop including them. But if it is a case that they're needed, they probably should be filled in.
Absolutely, and we're picking up as part of the practice for the new decision notes. You're right. So there'll be elements within the decision note that would drop off if not applicable, and we're obviously identifying as part of our process the key questions that then direct that content. So yeah, completely recognise that point, and that is being picked up.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions or comments on item 17? No? Happy to note the report. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. I think we'll close the meeting there. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good weekend. Thank you.